This is Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerry-Ann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Massachusetts, and this is a podcast that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community and beyond. Welcome to this week's episode. Today, we're about midway through the season, and I thought it would be good to have a check-in with you. When you go to meet with a psychiatrist for a follow-up appointment, it's kind of like having a check-in. Well, I'm a psychiatrist, you're here, I'm here, so let's check in. Today, I want to ask you a series of questions for reflection. I've done a previous check-in episode. It was last fall, 2021, so that would be around season 1. And in that check-in, I did provide a lot of additional information, so I would recommend that you go back and check out that check-in from last fall. And today, for our check-in, I'm going to start off with a general question, much like your psychiatrist might ask you at a follow-up appointment. I'm starting with the question, how has the last couple of weeks been for you? How's work? How's your personal life? How do you feel overall? And then from there, so I start off kind of very general, and I want you to think about the answers to those very general questions. And then I go a little bit deeper and more specific. So I'm going to ask you about 3 domains: your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. So how would you describe your mood over the last couple of weeks? Has it been mostly positive? Has it been mostly negative? Or has it been neutral? If your mood has been mostly neutral, what do you think has been getting in the way of it being positive? And I want you to think of this as kind of your first choice point. I want you to reflect on the things that you have the power to change that could influence your mood. What can you do to shift your mood out of neutral and into positive? Would you describe yourself or your life as vibrant? And if not, what might you have the power to change in your life that could shift it out of neutral and into vibrant? Have you been experiencing sadness or depression? Have you felt emotionless? Have you felt unmotivated? Do you feel like life is taking you for the ride, that you've just kind of been going through the motions? Maybe you need to consider taking an antidepressant. Maybe you need to increase the dose of your current antidepressant. Maybe you need to meet with a therapist to do cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. Depression has a way of telling us that there's nothing we can do to make anything better. Depression tells us that it's pointless. Depression teaches something called learned helplessness. So remember that question I initially asked you just maybe like 2 seconds ago? And I said, what do you have the power to change that could shift your life out of neutral and into vibrant or positive? Depression is going to tell you 100% that you don't have the power to change anything. And that's not true. But as I said, learned helplessness is something that comes about from depression or can lead to depression. And it tells us that every possible way that learned helplessness tells us every possible way that something is not going to work out. Learned helplessness is going to tell us, don't even bother starting, because I can tell you 100 ways that what you're about to do is not going to work. Learned helplessness says, you've tried it already. You've tried it so many times. In fact, you've tried it once. Once is enough. It didn't work the one time you tried it, so don't bother trying it again. Uh, I want you to really think about whether you've been impacted by learned helplessness. Whether when I asked you the question, what do you have the power to change, if your default was, I've already tried, you might be struggling with depression. You might be struggling with learned helplessness, which tells us there's no point to keep trying. So, again, I want to ask you, what do you have the power to change that could shift your mood out of neutral and into vibrant or positive? What are you telling yourself right now that you don't have the power to change? No, I can't answer that for you. You have to reflect on that. What do you feel like you have the power to change truly? And what are you telling yourself that you don't have the power to change? Because you feel like there's no point in trying. Have you been feeling stressed or anxious? People experience anxiety in different ways. So I want you to listen to the next few things I'm going to say, and I want you to think about if any of these things have been true for you. Have you experienced physical exhaustion that is out of proportion to the physical exertion that you gave that day? Do you have a headache at the end of the day? Do you have pain in your shoulders or lower back pain at the end of the day? Do you have bad eating patterns that you just can't break? Avoidance, irritability, heart racing, suddenly needing to take a deep breath. Have you had that experience where you've been so tense that suddenly you find yourself taking a deep breath? You don't realize you've been holding your breath. In the last 2 weeks, have you felt peace? Or have you felt tense, worried, and have had difficulty relaxing? You may need a medication for anxiety, or you may need an increase in the dose of your medication for anxiety. You may also need to meet with a therapist who understands how to treat anxiety. You may want to consider cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness to treat anxiety and stress. Now, not all anxiety is straightforward. Some anxiety is based in trauma. And so, in a follow up appointment or a check in, we would follow up on that too. And the medication plan, the medication part of it might be similar in that we might be thinking about whether or not to prescribe something, or might be thinking about whether or not to increase the dose of a medication, or whether medication is needed at all. But your therapy plan might be different because for anxiety that's based in trauma, a kind of a straightforward CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy might not be enough. You may need a custom designed plan for how to address your anxiety that you kind of talk with your therapist about. Now, tell me if you've been feeling anxious. Sorry, not anxious. I just talked about anxiety. Now, tell me if you've been feeling anger, irritability, grumpy over the last couple of weeks. What's going on? Sometimes anger is based in depression and unhappiness. So then we go back to the original part of our check-in, which asks about depression. You know, sometimes anger is based in anxiety. So you feel threatened, you feel worried about losing something. Sometimes anger is based in a fear of a loss of control. So some people have learned to use anger to control other people. Sometimes anger is a learned shortcut to solve problems because other kinder strategies either seem to take too long, or they require too much work, or sometimes they don't get you the results that you're looking for. So anger seems to be the default. So what do you think is the underlying reason for your anger? Because that's going to determine the solution. Now, medications aren't great at treating anger because anger tends to be multifactorial in its origin. And so we sometimes don't realize that anger can be a learned problem solving strategy that's hard to break. So, medications can sometimes treat the underlying depression or the underlying anxiety. Sometimes it can have a sedating quality and kind of reduce the intensity of your mood. If your anxiety is based in something like bipolar disorder, where you have a lot of mood instability, then medication can sometimes help to even out your mood and make you have less kind of incidents of severe anger. But anger in and of itself is very difficult to treat with medication because it comes from so many different angles. So therapy with a skilled clinician can make a huge difference when it comes to addressing anger. Now, I want to kind of reflect on your lifestyle over the last 2 weeks. I want you to reflect on your sleep patterns, falling asleep, staying asleep, getting up in the morning. What do you have the power to change that could improve your sleep quality? Do you have the power to turn off electronics at night so you can fall asleep better? Do you have the power to go to bed earlier? Do you temporarily need to take a low dose of melatonin to get your sleep cycle back on track? How is your focus? Do you find yourself to be quickly distracted by small things? Do you walk into a room and then forget why you're in the room? Let me tell you something. You're not having memory problems. You're just thinking about a million things all at one time. So when you walk from one room to another room, by the time you get into the second room, you don't remember why you're there because your mind is 10 miles down the road already. You've already had 100 thoughts by then. And so now you can't even remember why you walked into the room. You're not forgetting, you're distracted. So, what do you have the power to do to get your focus back on track? Do you have the power to turn off electronics again? Or maybe you can't turn them off, but maybe you can turn off notifications. A lot of things have a do not disturb function, and you have the power to put it on do not disturb for an hour or two each day. Have you ever just turned off all the noise and just paid attention to how it feels inside when everything is quiet? Okay. So now the other two things that I check on when I have check ins with people, I kind of already asked about a little bit. One is a question about changes in eating patterns. And often, if you've had a change in your eating pattern over the last 2 weeks, that could indicate stress or depression, or other kinds of changes. The other is to your baseline energy for the day. And so I asked about whether you're feeling fatigued in a way that is out of proportion to the actual physical exertion that you actually put out that day, because that could be indicative of your body holding on to stress. So the rest of this appointment or check in is going to be whatever your agenda is. There's a lot of other, conditions that I could screen for and ask about, and a lot of it kind of depends on the person that's in front of me. As I mentioned earlier, some people have bipolar disorder. Some people have a lot of other. So it kind of depends on your diagnosis, really, the reason that you're coming in. So I want you to kind of think. If I were your psychiatrist and you were meeting with me for a check-in, what issue would you want to bring to me? What question would you have? And once you have that issue, I want you to think about it. Once you have that issue or that question in your mind, I want you to think, what can I do today to start problem solving ways to get this issue addressed? For some people, they've been experiencing something and they want to know, should I be worried about this? That's their question. You may want to start with a primary care physician, potentially, if it's a question of, should I be worried about something or not? For some people, they have a provider, but they want a second opinion. They want to know if another psychiatrist would have made the same choice or come to the same conclusions with a diagnosis. So you have some questions about whether your treatment is the best it could be. In a situation like that, if you're looking for a second opinion, you may want to consider paying out of pocket for a private psychiatrist, and maybe just for one or two appointments, that the one or two appointments might get you kind of that initial evaluation. And you may want to let them know that the reason you're coming to them is for a second opinion. It's really helpful to know that from the beginning, that it's a second opinion consultation. For some people, the question they have is that they're concerned about someone in their life, a friend or a family member, and they want to know how to support them, because that person may have a mental health concern. And so, of course, a solution is going to depend on the problem. It's also going to depend on your relationship to the person. You may want to look into online resources like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI. There are also support groups. So, for example, if a loved one has passed away because of suicide, there's Dee Dee's Cry in Roxbury, Massachusetts, for those of you that are in state. If you've lost a loved one to homicide, there's the Peace Institute in Dorchester, Massachusetts, again, for those that are listening in state. If you're looking for a caregiver support group, I unfortunately don't have a specific one to recommend, but you may want to search online for that if that's what you're looking for. So if anyone that's listening, if anyone that's listening knows about caregiver support groups, definitely let me know. So if you're looking for kind of support and something in that direction, sometimes the online search might be the best kind of option. But that tends to be a bit more tricky to get because almost sometimes support groups are not well advertised. So yeah, which issue do you have that you wish you could talk to somebody about? I want you to think about how you can problem solve today, what you can do to begin to get that addressed. And in every appointment, I ask about safety. Namely, I ask about thoughts of suicide. And that kind of discussion about suicide is outside the scope of this pre-recorded podcast. I can't address anything emergent in this pre-recorded podcast, but there is a new national suicide hotline number. It is 988. Again, 988. So if you're worried about your potential to hurt yourself, if you're having thoughts of suicide, call 988. This is in America, in the US. I also ask people about whether they are having thoughts about harming another person. I ask people about whether they're experiencing hearing voices or seeing things other people can't see, which is more common than you think it is. And that would also require a separate podcast episode, but I do ask those questions. But let me know if you want to hear an episode about kind of what it's like to talk to a psychiatrist about hearing voices or about seeing things. I can definitely do an episode on that if that's of interest to people. So that's it for my mini check-in today. This is not a full appointment. As I mentioned, that appointments tend to be based on your own personal kind of requests and things that are going on for you. But I wanted you to just kind of really think about what's been going on for you this fall, what's been going on for you over the last 2 weeks, how your mood has been, how your lifestyle and habits have been. And I want to leave you with a couple of questions. One is, what are you doing to enjoy this season? What are you doing to enjoy this season? Again, going back to the initial questions that I asked in today's episode about what do you have the power to change? And when you hear that little nagging voice saying, I can't change anything, that might be learned helplessness. That might be hopelessness. And so you have to kind of fight back and say, that's not true. There are some things that I can change. It may just take more effort. It may take more energy than I have right now, but I can get help. and I can change something. I do have the power to change my life. The other question is, what are you doing to take care of yourself? I think it's important for you to be kind to yourself, to see yourself as valuable and worthy of self care. So that's it for today's episode. Take care, and I will talk with you again next week. So have a good week.